Hello, this is a presenter from the channel. I'm standing in an area that's been burnt in a wildfire. It's not too far away from where I live, and it is amazing just how much has been burned here. I can see some of the homes that are still standing. Some haven't fared quite as well as others, and we're just lucky it hasn't spread any further than this. In Australia, we've seen the devastation that wildfires can cause. But what happens when they burn through forests like this? What effect do they have on our environment? What's left behind after the flames go through? This is something that scientists have been trying to understand for a long time. And even though each fire is different, there are some general rules that apply to most fires. I am going to take you through the stages of succession after a fire and hopefully help you understand the complexity of these ecosystems, how they develop over time, and how humans have an impact on the fires that burn through them. Forests can burn at different intensities. They can be surface fires or crown fires. Surface fires are ground-level fires that burn under the canopy of trees. Crown fires, on the other hand, are much more intense. They start in the upper branches and spread from tree to tree through the canopy. The problem with crown fires is that they can be much more destructive and hard to control. There are two main factors that contribute to the intensity of fires. These are the amount of fuel available and the weather conditions. The fuel in this case is all of the vegetation. If you've got lots of fuel, then you've got a high fuel load, and that will lead to a more intense fire. If it's very dry, like it was earlier this year in Australia, then again, you're going to get a more intense fire. So why do you get these really intense fires? One of the factors, as I mentioned, is the amount of fuel available. When humans start to farm land, we often clear areas of native vegetation and replace them with crops like wheat, barley, cotton, vines, or fruit trees. But if we stop farming that land, those crops die and decompose and add their biomass to the soil. So now you've got this buildup of fuel that isn't being used. You've essentially created a fuel load that is ripe for burning. The other factor is weather. Hot, dry summers, followed by lightning strikes or discarded cigarettes, are usually responsible for starting bushfires. Once they get going, strong winds can fan the flames and spread the fire around. Firefighters work incredibly hard in these conditions, and one of the challenges they face is they trying to put out fires that are developing in this complex landscape. We learned a lot about how fire regimes affect ecosystems, and there is a balance that we want to try and keep. A small fire every couple of years might help get rid of some of the fuel and therefore reduce the chances of a bigger fire later on. But if you get a big fire, followed by a few small fires, that buildup of fuel can continue, and then you risk another big fire. But what happens when a forest does burn? The effects of fire depend on its intensity, but also the type of plants and animals that live there. Some plants and animals are adapted to fire. They require fire to germinate, or they need the disturbance that fire brings in order to thrive. Other species are killed outright by fire. When a fire sweeps through an area, it changes everything. The habitat that was there before is destroyed, and new communities of plants and animals start to move in. In primary succession, the first organisms to colonize an area after a disturbance like a fire are called the pioneers. They are hardy species that can survive in harsh conditions. After a forest fire, the first plants to appear are often annual grasses and herbs. They quickly colonize the burned area, taking advantage of the nutrients released by the fire and the sunlight that reaches the ground. These plants play an important role because their extensive root systems help stabilize the soil and prevent erosion. They also add organic matter to the soil as they grow and eventually die, making it richer and more hospitable for other life. As the pioneer species grow and die, they begin to modify the environment, making it more suitable for other types of plants. With the grasses and herbs come shrubs and small trees. These species, known as secondary colonizers, take advantage of the improved soil conditions and the protection from the elements provided by the pioneer species. The shrubs and small trees further enrich the soil, creating a more complex habitat that supports a greater diversity of life. Next, the mid-successional species move in. These species are better competitors, and they begin to dominate the landscape. Depending on the ecosystem, this might include species like oak and maple trees. These mid-successional species form a diverse and complex habitat that supports a wide variety of plants and animals. As these species grow and age, they create a shaded and stable environment that eventually leads to the late successional species. These species are adapted to grow in the shade and often have long lifespans. In a forest ecosystem, this might include large long-lived trees, such as Douglas fir or hemlock. This late successional community is relatively stable and self-sustaining. It forms a climax community that persists until another disturbance occurs. Animals also play a role in this process. After a fire, there's often an increase in the numbers of certain animals. For example, deer and other herbivores may move into the area to take advantage of the abundant vegetation. Their presence can help control the growth of certain plants and also disperse seeds. As the habitat changes, other animals move in, including insects, birds, and reptiles. Each of these animals contributes to the overall health of the ecosystem, helping to break down dead wood, pollinate plants, and control insect populations. Of course, we can't talk about fire without mentioning the Aboriginal people of Australia. For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal people have been using fire to manage the land. They would light small fires that helped control the growth of vegetation and encourage the growth of certain plants that they used for food. These traditional Aboriginal land management practices had a profound impact on the biodiversity of the continent. One of the consequences of these traditional practices was the creation of grassy ecosystems. In a study published in 2016, researchers looked at pollen preserved in lake sediments in the tropical savannas of northern Australia. They found evidence of increased dryness around 40,000 years ago, and they suggested that Aboriginal people were using fire to modify the landscape and produce grasslands for hunting. Grasses tend to thrive in warmer, drier climates, so by clearing the forest, the Aboriginal people may have inadvertently helped the grasses survive in this environment. Now, humans have a huge influence on the frequency and intensity of fires. We decide where to build our houses and towns. We choose what to grow and where to grow it, and we decide how to fight fires. All of these decisions have an impact on how ecosystems respond to fire. The good news is that ecosystems are resilient. Even after the most intense fires, they can recover and return to their previous state. With careful planning and management, we can help ecosystems recover more quickly from fire and reduce the impacts of future fires. This includes things like reducing the fuel load by controlling invasive species and keeping towns away from forests. In areas that are prone to fires, we can also learn from the past. By studying the history of fires in an area, we can better understand the natural fire regime and manage accordingly. In recent decades, there has been a push to use prescribed burns to reduce the fuel load and mimic the small fires that occur naturally. Prescribed burns are carefully controlled fires that are lit under specific conditions. They're designed to burn off fuel and reduce the risk of larger fires later on. So after a wildfire, there's a lot to consider. How the land is managed in the future will have a major impact on how the ecosystem responds and recovers. If you've watched this far, I thank you for your support. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you have, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on our latest content. Thanks for watching.